mental health is very important in primary education. Teachers of early years and primary children are in a very privileged position because children, in a sense, want to love them. They want to trust them, they want to be like them. So they're models for good behaviour, they're models for attitudes, they're models for aspiration. And all of those things are really fundamentally important. And for many children, the teacher is a very significant influence on their current development.
And the importance of teachers in children's lives is underlined by research showing that around 8% of children aged between 5 and 10 have a mental health disorder. In an average primary class, that's 2 or 3 pupils. We'll take a look at some of the most common mental health issues, including behavioural difficulties, oppositional defiant disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression and separation anxiety, identifying their warning signs and what to do if you see them.
Within the 15 years that I've worked in education, there does seem to have been an increase in mental health issues in children. And so as a teacher, sometimes you can go home at the end of the day absolutely frazzled and worn out because of the needs of the children that you're really trying your best to address.
Health authorities predict figures will continue to rise. Why is it happening? Many factors are probably involved, but educational psychologists believe that the closure of special schools is one.
One of the big changes has been the closure of special schools and the placement of children in mainstream schools over the last 35 years. But it's not been a uniform, uphill, straight sort of incline. It's been very complex and very difficult. The major effect of those changes on teachers in classrooms, I think, has been to make, obviously, greater demands of them. At a time when maybe 2 or 3% of children weren't in mainstream schools, who now are, that's 2 or 3% of children with exceptional difficulties who are now a challenge to those teachers. Children who are happy and settled and confident, you know, they get on with their lives, they cope with difficulties, they manage small frustrations, they manage small upsets. Not always beautifully, but they do manage them. But there are other children where it just all seems too much for them and they just can't cope with things. And they're the ones that I think we need to be most concerned about. The most common difficulty in school rather than disorder is behavioural difficulties. Children who challenge or don't comply or whose conduct is a cause for concern. You might see a child who cries very readily when previously they wouldn't, or you might see a child who does some work and becomes distressed by the quality of the work and wants to rip it up or defaces it in some way. What teachers have to look at is not so much the way children behave, but the changes in that behaviour. If a child has been a boisterous and difficult child, that may not be something a teacher wants. But if a child who's been a boisterous and difficult child suddenly becomes a quiet, tearful child, that is not a good thing. That is a very bad thing.
We did have a young man recently who came to us who would not make eye contact. His head was down all the time. For him, there was nothing positive. He just saw himself as a total failure in every way, and he would erupt at the slightest thing. The end of my pencil's broken, that's it, it's the end of the world, back goes the chair, off he goes out of the classroom. We attempted to gather what information we could from the parents, and we decided that this child's needs were still beyond what we were capable of dealing with. So then we called in educational psychologists to do more in-depth reports on him academically and to discuss things with him socially and how he was cognitively. And I have to say, the recommendations that they made and that we've put into place have made a significant difference to that child.
It's defined by children being oppositional, negativistic, not doing as they're told. They're just so difficult. They're the sort of child you say to sit down and they stand up, and you say stand up and they sit down. They are very determined to have their own way, and their own way is often a way that is unhelpful to other children because it can be quite self-seeking.
ODD is clearly a challenge for teachers. Many years ago, this kind of behaviour would have been punished. Today, experts encourage a different approach.
These days, teachers often try to recognise that the child is being obstructive and being difficult and oppositional, but they will actually try not to cajole them or negotiate with them, but make adjustments to the environment which show the child that there's benefit from complying. And that's quite difficult. It's quite hard to do.
There's always a reason behind children behaving the way in which they behave. It's just a case of finding out what that reason is. I don't believe there's truly something that as a child that just arrives and thinks I'm going to be a naughty child. There's always a reason behind it, and there's always a way to manage it. And I think as teachers we have to recognise that and think, right, what is the way, or who can help me find the way to manage that child? Because when you can manage a child's difficult behaviours, it just makes everything else in life so much easier. So it's about sharing good practice. If that fails, going for the extra advice from the experts. But there's always a reason why. It's just finding out what the reason is and what we're going to do about it.
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a challenge in the sense that whether you believe in it or not as a diagnostic category, the children undeniably exist. The key features of it, of course, are the fact that it's got three elements, really. There's the issue about attention. The child's attention to tasks is poor. They can't hold their concentration. They can't manage very often to complete activities because they just can't get to the end of it or they can't start it. The hyperactivity side is very clear and very obvious. These children are vastly overactive. They find it extremely challenging to sit and to listen and to be still. They're often very easily distracted from what's going on. And the third element, which is a bit more hidden, is their impulsiveness, actually. They can't wait. They're the sort of children who, at one level, just shout out in class. The teacher says, you know, what's 2 3s? And they're asking a particular child, and from the back right-hand corner comes a voice that cannot be quelled. The
children are impulsive and their behaviour will not just be challenging. They will be the child that's constantly tapping on the desk or fidgeting, can't sit still in their chair, which I think are the things that separate them from a child who just has behavioural difficulties. There are times when that can be really, really difficult, and many's the time we've all gone into the staff room and almost cried into our coffee and said, I just can't do this anymore, I can't cope, he's driving me absolutely insane. But as teachers we do what we all do, we take a deep breath and think, right, next lesson, new start, here we go again.
There does come a point when you have to say, I can't cope with this alone. I have to seek support. And I think that's a very clear message that needs to go out to teachers, to head teachers, to anybody that works with young children. It's not a go-it-alone situation.
If it's persisting, it's going to be not only a hindrance to other children's learning, but a hindrance to that child's learning too. And therefore, plans have to be put into place to do what one can to make a difference for the child as well. So bringing in the special needs coordinator, the SENCO, is really important at this stage.
We're seeing an increased number of children with severe depression at the age of 10. That was unheard of when I was a teacher. Depression was something that older people got. But I've got a young man at the moment, he's only age 10, a school refuser, clinically diagnosed by his doctor as having severe depression. We've managed to get him into school, he's working in the nurture room, but he can't access mainstream education, and he's got SATs in a few months' time. There's no way he's going to be able to access that. So we are now looking at an alternative curriculum, we're looking at support strategies, and we are already working with outside agencies. And that's one of many within the school day.
Depression is a really serious, significant disorder, which is clearly going to have an impact on children, and it requires proper intervention from psychiatry or psychology. If they're depressed, it's very much like a cloud with them all the time. It shows in all their interactions. So when they go out in the playground, they probably won't interact with other children. They'll probably stand alone. You can't get them to seem to show signs of pleasure or satisfaction, and they stand alone, and they don't have any friends, and they always look as though they're just not really engaging. Then they might be depressed, and it's no stronger than that. There's a whole group of childhood disorders, so-called, which are very helpfully put together, which are the anxiety disorders. And the one that many people talk about is separation anxiety. Children generally like to go to school, but there's a transition between being at home and being at school, which some children don't find particularly easy to manage. For a very few children, though, it persists beyond that developmentally appropriate stage into middle childhood. And you get children just occasionally who become very anxious about going to school, and that is separation anxiety.
Whilst a condition like separation anxiety appears easy to spot, the experts warn that teachers should not rush to attach that label. It's more important, they say, to observe and report the facts, either to a SENCO or another specialist.
If you see a child who is reluctant to part from a parent, and you report that the child is reluctant to part from a parent, and that when they come into school they look distressed for 5 minutes, but can then be settled, and that by the time, say, the register has been completed, they're engaged with activities, that's descriptive, that's helpful, really helpful. What's not helpful is for someone to say, I've got a child with separation anxiety, because you have to unpack all that. And if you're going to unpack all that, you might as well just say what you said in the first place, because that actually describes what's happening, rather than making attributions about what's going on in people's heads or lives. What I would hope teachers would do is use their skill, knowledge and experience to identify the needs of a child, and not worry about what category it falls into, but just identify what it is that that child needs, what arrangements are needed to be put into place to help the child, and then to discuss those issues within the school. It may be that a diagnosis will follow subsequently, but that's the end of the line, not the beginning of the line.
We are an emotional crutch for some of these children. They just need that they can just come and go, it's safe. It's safe to talk. It's safe to feel like this, and nobody's going to judge me because I'm feeling like this moment in time. And we can then provide strategies. It's not a quick fix. Anything to do, when you've got a situation like this, behavioural, emotional, whatever, there are no quick fixes. It has to be part of your everyday policy and procedure and the way that you are. And consistency is really important.
The role of the primary teacher in this is absolutely crucial, because alongside the parent, they are in a pretty amazing position of having responsibility and trust that very few other people in life will ever have again from that young person. In fact, until that young person has a steady relationship much later on in life, there'll be no other person who's as important to them ever again. So the role of the primary teacher is fundamental in all this.